Job lived in the land of Uz, a quiet place far from the big cities where life went on slowly. He was a respected man, known for being fair, honest, and faithful to God. He was not a king, he did not command armies, but he was the kind of person everyone admired. He did the right thing, even when no one was looking. He didn't get involved in evil, he didn't treat anyone badly, and everything he had was the result of hard work and integrity. Job was very rich. He had thousands of sheep, oxen, camels, and many employees. He also had a large family, 7 sons and 3 daughters. Even with all this, he was not arrogant. On the contrary, he was careful with everything, especially his faith. Every morning, he offered sacrifices to God for each of his children. He thought, what if one of them has sinned without knowing it? He was the kind of father who cared about his children's hearts, not just what was on the outside. Subscribe to the channel for more exciting Bible stories and turn on notifications so you don't miss any videos. If this content touches your heart and you want to support us, feel free to click on the Thanks a Lot button. All help is welcome and makes a big difference. Job's life seemed perfect. He had possessions, family, health, and respect. Anyone looking in from the outside thought that nothing could go wrong. But what no one knew was that far away, a conversation was taking place that would change everything. Up in heaven, where eternal decisions are made, a question was raised, a question about Job. And that question would put everything to the test. Not just his riches, but his faith, his patience, his soul. Up in heaven, where only God's eyes can see, a different kind of meeting was taking place. Angels appeared before him, each with their own role. Among them was Satan. He came walking as if he owed nothing, saying he was wandering around earth, observing everything. That's when God said Job's name. Have you seen my servant Job? A righteous man, faithful, who respects me and avoids evil. Satan smiled ironically. Of course he is faithful. Look at the life he has. Everything works out for him. You protect him, his house, his possessions, even his crops prosper. But what if you take everything away? Will he still worship you? It was a direct challenge. Satan was saying that Job's faith only existed because his life was good, that if things got tough, he would turn his back on God like anyone else. Then God replied, everything he has is in your hands, just don't touch his life. And so, unbeknownst to Job, the greatest test of his life began. Heaven had authorized a series of losses, not because Job deserved to suffer, but because his faith would be used as an example. God trusted Job. And Satan wanted to prove that he was only faithful because he was comfortable. Meanwhile, down below, Job woke up like any other day, unaware of what was about to happen, unable to imagine that in a few hours his life would be turned upside down, and that, one by one, everything he had would be torn from his hands. The day began normally. Clear skies, bright sun, work going on as usual. Job was perhaps praying or checking on his flocks or just resting. But then, out of nowhere, a messenger came running, panting, his face white with fear. The Sabaeans have attacked. They've taken the oxen and killed the servants. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. Before Job could react, another arrived, his eyes wide. Fire fell from the sky. It burned the sheep and the servants. Everyone died. I was the only one who escaped. And as if that weren't enough, a third arrived shortly after. The Chaldeans formed 3 groups, attacked the camels, and killed the servants. I was the only one who escaped. 3 pieces of news. 3 disasters, all at once. And Job stood there listening in silence, trying to understand what was happening. But it wasn't over yet. The 4th messenger arrived. His voice was shaking. It was the worst news of all. Your sons and daughters were in your eldest son's house, eating and drinking wine. Suddenly a strong wind came from the desert, struck the 4 corners of the house, and it collapsed. Everyone died. I alone escaped. Time stood still. Job stood up. He tore his clothes, a gesture of deep pain. He shaved his head, and he fell face down on the ground. But what came out of his mouth was not a cry, nor was it rebellion. It was worship. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Even after losing everything, Job did not sin with his words. He did not accuse God. He did not complain about life. But what he did not know was that the test was not over yet. The enemy would return with an even more cruel plan, this time targeting Job's own body. Once again, up in heaven, Satan appeared before God. The first part of the test had failed. Job lost everything and yet remained faithful. So Satan tried again. Sure, he still has his health. Touch his body and then he will curse you. God allowed it. He said, "You may touch him, but do not take his life." And that was when Job was struck even harder. Overnight, his body was covered with sores. From the soles of his feet to the top of his head, everything hurt. He was itchy, feverish, in pain, and ashamed. Job sat down on a pile of ashes, the place of the rejected, those who had nothing left. He picked up a piece of broken pottery and began to scratch himself, because that was all he had to relieve the pain. That was when his own wife approached him. Already tired of so much suffering, seeing her husband in that state, she said, "Do you still have faith? Curse this God and die." It was as if she were saying, "End this once and for all. Why continue suffering like this?" But Job replied firmly, without shouting or arguing, "You speak like someone who has lost their mind. Are we to accept only what is good from God and reject what is bad?" Even covered in wounds, alone in the city's garbage, Job still did not sin with his lips. But inside, something was beginning to break. The pain was not only physical, it was in his heart, in his soul. And it was at that moment that three friends appeared, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. Each of them left his home and met the other two on the road. The plan was simple: go to Uz, visit their friend and stay with him in his suffering. But when they arrived and saw Job from afar, they almost didn't recognize him. That strong, respected, healthy man was now just skin and bones, covered with wounds, thrown on the ground, with his face in the dust. The scene froze the three of them. They tore their clothes, threw dust on their heads, a sign of mourning and sadness, and sat there with him on the ground. They stayed there for 7 days and 7 nights in silence. No one said a word, because sometimes there are no words. Suffering speaks louder than any words. But after the silence, the words came, and then everything began to change. Eliphaz was the first to speak. He tried to be careful, but his words were heavy. "Job, you always gave advice to others. Now that it's you, why are you so down? Would an innocent person suffer like this?" His intentions may have been good, but it hurt. It was like rubbing salt in the wound. Bildad came next, saying that God never acts wrongly. If your children died, it was their fault. Yes, he said that. In the midst of pain, these words sounded like stones. Zophar, the harshest, was blunt. "You deserve even more than this." Job, who was already destroyed on the outside, now began to be crushed on the inside. Those who came to comfort him were accusing him. They insinuated that he had sinned, that he was reaping what he had sown. But Job knew his own conscience. He knew he had hidden nothing from God. And in the face of these accusations, instead of remaining silent, he decided to speak and pour out everything that was trapped in his heart. After hearing all that from his friends, Job could no longer remain silent. It was too much pain inside and out. So he opened his mouth, and what came out was not anger toward God, nor a response to anyone. It was lamentation. It was venting. It was pure sadness. He did not curse God, but he cursed his own birth. He said it would have been better never to have come into the world, that the day he was born should be forgotten, erased from the calendar. He wanted to understand why someone who tries to do everything right ends up suffering so much, and why God would allow such a thing. Job's words were not spoken carefully. They were torn, painful, like someone who doesn't sleep, doesn't eat, can't find peace anywhere. He asked questions like, why does God give life to those who only find suffering? Why keep me alive if the only thing I hope for is for everything to end soon? As he spoke, he showed that his greatest fear was not poverty or illness. It was feeling forgotten by God. It was living with the feeling that everything had lost its meaning, and he didn't understand why. With each answer Job gave, his friends became harsher. They insisted that he must have done something wrong, that God was just and didn't punish anyone for no reason. But Job didn't accept this explanation. He knew his conscience was clear, and so the more they talked, the more he questioned, not with arrogance, but with sincerity. He wanted an answer, a sign, a reason. While Job argued with his three friends, trying to defend himself against their accusations, someone who had been watching began to stir. It was Elihu. Younger than the others, he had remained silent out of respect for their age. But now he could no longer hold back what was stuck in his throat. He stood up and began to speak, and he spoke firmly. He did not defend his friends, but he did not spare Job either. I waited for you to speak, thinking that wisdom comes with age, but no one here has given a worthwhile answer, he said. Job, are you saying that you are righteous and that God is wrong? That doesn't make sense. Elihu had a different approach. He didn't accuse Job of hidden sin, but he thought he was going too far in his words, that he was portraying God as unjust just because he didn't understand what was happening. God speaks to us in many ways, he continued, sometimes in dreams, sometimes through pain. He can use suffering to free us from something worse. Just because you don't understand now doesn't mean he's silent or against you. It was an explanation the others hadn't given. Elihu saw suffering as a warning, as correction, not as punishment. He didn't say you deserve this, but rather, perhaps God is teaching you something you haven't yet realized. Job listened but did not respond. He did not argue, perhaps because he was already too tired. Perhaps because deep down he knew that no one there could really explain what was happening. Not his friends, not Elihu. In the midst of that endless discussion, something different happened. The sky changed, the wind grew stronger, and a storm began to form. But it was not just any rain. It was the kind of wind that makes the earth shake, that carries a heavy presence in the air. And then, from the midst of the storm, God spoke. Not through dreams, not through prophets, himself directly. His voice did not come with explanations. It came with questions, many questions, but each one hit home like an arrow. Where were you when I created the world? Who set the boundaries of the sea? Have you ever commanded the sun to rise? Have you ever entered the depths of the ocean? Job, who had spent days asking questions, was now the one who needed to listen. God wasn't there to give a report on why all this was happening. He wanted to show who he was, that his wisdom was far greater than any human pain could ever comprehend. He spoke of wild animals, the sky, the stars, thunder, the sea, of creatures that no man can control. And he asked, "Do you understand this? Can you do this?" With each question, God reminded Job that there are things that the eyes cannot see, that the human mind cannot comprehend. And it was not to humiliate Job. It was to show that there is a greater plan, even when everything seems wrong. Job had nothing more to say, no answer, only silence. Because there, before the voice of God, he realized that he didn't need to understand everything to trust. That seeing who God really is changes everything. But God wasn't finished yet. There was something more, something no one expected. And it would change not only the story of Job, but also the story of those who had accused him. Job was silent. After everything he heard from God, there was no room left to argue. He had no more questions, no more complaints. Only one certainty. He had spoken too much about what he did not understand. So, with humility, he said, "I knew you only by hearsay. But now my eyes see you. I regret what I said. I regret it in dust and ashes." It wasn't regret for a hidden sin, as his friends said. It was for trying to understand God with the limited mind of a human being, for speaking without knowing. It was the moment when Job stopped searching for answers and simply recognized who God was. Then God did something surprising. He turned to Job's three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, and said, "I am angry with you. You have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has. Now bring 7 bulls and 7 rams, and offer a sacrifice, and ask Job to pray for you. Only then will I forgive you." The friends who had spent days accusing Job of sin now needed him to be forgiven. Ironic, isn't it? Those who thought they were right now depended on the prayers of the one they had judged, and Job prayed. Even though he was hurt and tired, he prayed for them. And it was at that moment, in that very gesture, that everything began to change. The Bible says that when Job prayed for his friends, God changed his fortune. And it was no small thing. God gave Job twice as much as he had before. His flocks, his possessions, his honor, everything returned. His brothers, sisters, and acquaintances appeared to comfort and give him gifts. Job's life did not return to what it was before. It went beyond that. God blessed his last years more than his first. He gained twice as much as he had lost. 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. Everything that had been taken away was now returned multiplied, and it didn't stop there. Job had 10 more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters, and his daughters were so beautiful that they became known throughout the region. Unlike the custom of the time, Job gave his daughters an inheritance along with their brothers. It was a simple gesture, but it showed his heart. Fair, generous, different. The Bible says that Job lived another 140 years after that. He saw his children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and even the 4th generation. It was a long life, full of stories and memories. But even though he had regained everything, some marks remained. The scars of what he had been through did not disappear with his possessions or his new family. They remained there as a reminder that he had survived, that he had endured what seemed unbearable. But even with everything new, Job was never the same. He had seen the greatness of God, heard his voice, experienced rock bottom and also restoration. And all of this left something in him that no one could take away. A deep understanding that God is greater than any pain, greater than any answer. Job's story is not just about loss and victory. It's about what happens inside us when everything seems out of control. Job went through pains that few people ever face. He lost his possessions, his children, his health, his friends, his peace, and yet he did not lose his faith. Even when he questioned, even when he cried out in pain, even when he thought God had fallen silent. The great lesson of his life is not only in the happy ending, it is in the entire journey. Job showed that it is possible to be faithful even without understanding. That true faith does not depend on explanations, but on trust. He never knew what happened in heaven, that conversation between God and Satan. He lived through it all without knowing why, and yet he chose not to give up. His story also shows that it is not wrong to ask questions, cry, feel angry, or feel lost. Job did all of that. God did not rebuke him for feeling that way. He rebuked his friends who tried to explain his suffering in overly simplistic terms, because not all pain is punishment, not all loss is fault. Sometimes what we go through is part of something only God understands. What's more, Job forgave. Praying for the friends who judged him was perhaps one of his greatest acts of faith. God's blessing came after that act, because true restoration is not only in what we have, but in what we carry inside. In the end, Job got everything back, but he was no longer the same man. He was stronger, wiser, deeper. And he left us with a question worth thinking about. Does our faith remain steadfast even when everything goes wrong? Job's story does not end with riches. It ends with maturity, with a heart that saw pain up close but chose to trust anyway, and no one can take that away. If you like the story of Job and want to continue following other stories of faith and overcoming adversity, be sure to like this video and share it with your loved ones. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content. Together, we will explore more powerful lessons from the Bible.